Hello, everyone. Welcome to the March 2025 edition of AZBioPEERS. Today, we have a wonderful panel to discuss the keys to building investor relationships. And I will allow everyone to introduce themselves. Daryl, would you like to go ahead?
Sure. My name is Daryl Baker. I am a fractional CFO. I've been part of the AZ Bio community, I'm going to say, for over 10 years now. And this is a fantastic organization. I currently am working specifically with Annuncia Medical and Elsa Abruzzo. Elsa was supposed to be on the panel today. She's not feeling well, so I'm going to try to pinch hit for her. I'm also a member of the board of Neolight. Some of you may be familiar with that name as well. I've got I'm at 30 plus years of experience. I started my career at Ernst and Young. Came to the Phoenix office of EY in 1994. So I've been in this market for over 30 years. And have spent most of my career in what I call early stage publicly traded companies. So admittedly, most of my equity raising experience has been in the public space. And in the last handful of years, I've gotten more involved in early stage investing.
Thank you. And Rick, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Morello. I'm the CEO of C&D Life Sciences. We are a neurodiagnostics company based in Scottsdale, founded in 2018, but our first sort of real formative year was 2020, just as actually COVID was hitting, and had an initial seed investment locally from Honor Health, which we can certainly talk about as part of the discussion. And I've been in health and life sciences now for 25 to 30 years and have been part of large Fortune 500 companies, but in the last 15 years have focused on early stage companies working with inventors out of universities and trying to take what they've built from a scientific and medical standpoint and build it into a thriving company. We have offices in Boston and Atlanta. We're now about 150 people after being about 5 people about 5 years ago. So it's been quite the ride, and the quality and breadth and depth of the investors we have obviously are critical and have been critical to our growth.
Thank you, Rick. And Steve.
Hi, all. Good to meet you guys, and thanks for the time. Thanks for setting this up. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been pretty much only oncology the last 25 years, post PhD. About 10 years in diagnostics. Worked at the Quest Diagnostics, built their whole empire of next gen testing, and that's still the largest non-cancer testing operation in the world. Did a lot of bioinformatics. In the last 15 years, yeah, a lot of company building and a lot of drug development. Been involved in 2 drugs that were given to patients, then a whole lot of mountain climbs where you turn around and just kind of get a drug, through. But all that is always raising a lot of money. It's raising a lot of money and then putting it to work. And so love to, chat through on that. I've been here in Arizona for 14 years. Been involved in building a number of Arizona-based biotech companies, mostly therapeutic, but a diagnostic here and there.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. Now, to begin our discussion, I just want to go into thinking about really how early should life science companies begin building relationships with potential investors? And what strategies have you found most effective for fostering long-term investor trust? And Daryl, would you like to take that question first?
Sure, I'll take a shot at it. Admittedly, I've never done early stage from inception, but this is kind of more of a macro perspective, right? Which is you should start establishing relationships with potential investors before you even come up with the concept, right? You should be thinking about who are those people that would be, best suited to participate as an investor. And in the early rounds, right, you want to be thinking friends and family, angel groups, right? Those are the kind of people that are going to be able to kind of provide seed capital. In terms of trust, building trust, this is whether it's early stage, it doesn't matter what the stage is. The way you build trust with your investors is you do what you say you're going to do, and build that credibility. And when things don't work out the way that you expect that they should, you communicate with your investors frequently and regularly, to provide them updates, especially if things are not moving down the path the way that you kind of expected them to. It's just critical that you maintain that credibility and that open dialogue and relationship with your investor at any stage. Those are kind of my initial thoughts on that.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. Thank you. And Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it really helps to start. I mean, this topic is relationship building, and I think you got to take that very seriously. I mean, nobody wants to be sold something when they don't know you. It's just, but we do it all the time. I mean, you just can't help it because you're out, you want to raise money, and so you're looking for new relationships, and and then you lead with have an opportunity. So you're selling to somebody, and then you don't they don't know you, and you really do have to think like 2 years ahead of time about who you're going to ask for money and have the right to build that relationship ahead of time. So it's a discipline of just always building a relationship that at some point you can go to. And I do think the briefing, even some of the informal briefings of, hey, I'm thinking about doing this new company, we're putting it together. We're too early to talk to you for real, investment, but this is the area, this is how we're thinking about it. And, we can tell you more under confidentiality, but just want to let you know this is going to consume my time for the next couple of years. And, we're pretty excited about it. We got a lot of interest, but just those kind of informal updates, you've got to, I think there's too much formality in some ways in terms of the interaction with investors by CEOs, especially the first time CEOs. My joke is never work for a first time CEO and never be a first time CEO. And it's a bit tongue in cheek. It's been true in my career, but it's kind of true. So, when you just think of this as just like if you were selling, Boy Scout tickets or Girl Scout cookies or whatever, you build those relationships, and that's who buys. And you have to build those ahead of time. And so you've got to have a plan of how you're going to think about, building relationships, but you got to do it really ahead of time. And it also helps the investors to talk about, and just get your head into what kind of money am I going to ask for in 2 years? Because it's a much more appealing to an investor to know that, hey, I'm talking today, like say an angel, for some money, really where we're going to be in a couple of years is here. And then they can help, it helps them think about, well, how do they put their money to work now in a way that will, they'll be in a good place in a couple of years. So you really do have to think a couple of years ahead and then work backwards with relationships.
Yeah, I can definitely understand how that's key to really be sure to think far in advance. And Steve, when we're thinking about a lead investor, how do you attract and secure a lead investor, and what role do they play in setting terms and driving momentum as you're funding?
They're everything. And, I wish I could just say, here's what you do. But I mean, my experience, I'll give you we did a spin out of ASU and I raised 25 million. That took 14 months. That was 100 no's to get 3 yeses. One of those three was a lead investor that came after about 6 months into the process. Then it took another 8 months to fill out the term sheet of 25 million. And then the B round wasn't that much easier. I mean, it was 50 million raised. And so, you see the press release and you go, oh, you raised 50 million. What you don't see is 9 months of 100 plus no's, to get the other three filled out to get that 50 million. But it's all about that lead investor. And a guy gave me really good advice. He said, look, this really comes down to at these funds, you have to have someone who, at their Monday meetings, their typical are Monday, they're saying what new deals, what opportunities have come in. And you have to have someone who says, look, you can fire me, but this is the best thing I've ever seen, and we're doing this. And if we're not doing this, then I'm out. I feel so passionately about this one that I will champion this, and I'll put my reputation on the line as an investor in front of my peers. in front of the partners, that may be senior to me, in front of the owners of the fund, that this is something we should really do. And until you have that person, you don't have a lead. But you have to have someone who believes so strongly in what you're doing, even more than you, that they, drinking the Kool-Aid even more than you are. And if you don't have that, you don't have an investor, you don't have a lead. And so, it's really you get in a very frustrating situation, especially with the very professional biotech VCs, and the more famous, the more this is a pattern where they'll say, it's kind of interesting. And when you have a lead investor come back to me, in other words, when someone else is so passionate about this, if they've done all the hard work, they've done the due diligence, we trust them, they pulled in the experts, they paid for other experts to come in and review this deck, they believe in it enough so strongly that then will come in. So it's kind of true in one fund. You'll see some of that, like you'll talk to the people, but nobody in the fund has really said, you can fire me, but this company, I will stake my reputation as an investor on these guys. And until they see something like that, you don't have a lead investor within a fund, and you don't have a lead investor kind of in the community. Once you get the lead investor, then they help you pitch. They're like, well, okay, let's close this round, and then I'll go, enlist a bunch of other people. But you have to get that person, otherwise you just, you're a long ways away. So like I would say probably in a typical long raise, half the time is probably spent getting a lead investor, and the other half of the time is spent filling out the round.
And Rick, what experiences do you have regarding lead investors?
Yeah, I think I've had a pretty diverse mix of scenarios of lead investors, from what's I think Steve mentioned are kind of classic bigger firm lead investors, and to his point, you go to a lot of meetings and you hear, hey, this sounds interesting, but someone who really starts to get conviction and is spending time, and then of course is eventually saying, look, I'm putting together a term sheet and get something on the table. And also what often happens is once that group does that, then others who have been potentially interested but not committing, all of a sudden they get conviction too. So getting that first group in sort of a more traditional classic, kind of raise is just, super critical. And I would say that doing the homework and understanding the type of investments they've made, spending time and even saying, I'd love to speak to a couple of your companies and reach out and say, I'd love to understand how it is working with you all, and so on. So cultivating that in, again, more traditional circles has a certain approach. And yes, looking for that partner who's going to go to the meeting and say, I want this, this is why, and then moving towards something that's on paper as quickly, as is feasible. But it takes a lot, and that marriage is going to be with you for a while. So it's incredibly important. I would say in less traditional scenarios, even with C&D Life Sciences, because we were going into sort of a seed round where we needed a smaller amount of money. We had people like Honor Health who are not going to lead. We had some others who aren't going to lead. We had an NIH grant that was great, but who's going to lead, let's say, a $5 million type seed round? Well, in this case, it was two individual, I'll call them super angels, who were starting to be professional investors, but had been entrepreneurs and they had big networks. And when they had strong conviction, then it was, okay, how long can they lead? Because it's one thing if they're leading a small first seed round and they're going to have some terms and rights, but will they be able to help us raise, 3 or 4 or 5 million after that before we really go to a Series A? And so that actually worked out well, because our two leads, not only did they have conviction, but they had shown that they had really good networks of people who I then went and had informal, 1 hour meetings in Phoenix around, a conference table with that network, and got to know some of them and looked at their backgrounds. And they all sort of said, we think this is exciting and we can help until you really need to go out and get, the $20 million. So I think either scenario can work, but the, kind of the commonality of really getting conviction, understanding their backgrounds, understanding their networks and their intentions, and then get something on the table. And of course, even when these individual leads put something on the table, it sparked other people to say, wait a second, we'd like to put something on the table. So anyway, I think we can talk about the trials and tribulations of terms that the leads, might put forth. But I think, as we've been talking about, really being able to get someone or some group to step up with all the right reasons to say, okay, now I have somebody who's willing to do the work.
Yeah, if I could just add a couple observations here. Number one, raising money is really hard, right? This is a very, very, very difficult effort to engage in. And as Steve said, you talk to 100, if you get three, that's a win. If it were baseball, you'd be out of baseball, really early in your career if you only got to hit three times out of 100, right?
Thanks,
So,
Daryl.
so you, ha- yeah. So you have to be very, very persistent. You have to be diligent, right? And you have to you have to have a real thick skin, right? You got to get used to people saying no to you. And so that's just par for the course, right? The other thing that strikes me as important here is that in addition to the persistence, right? You have to understand that investors like to run in herds. There's a herd mentality. And that's why getting this lead investor is so critical, right? To your point, Rick, like Honor Health is great, NIH is great, but they're not going to take the lead there. So you've got to find that investor, like Steve said, right, that is willing to kind of put it all on the line for you and drink the Kool-Aid, so that they can kind of bring their herd along, and kind of once you get that herd bought in, then it starts to get a little bit easier. But it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to make this happen.
Yeah, they all want to be the only one doing it along with everybody else.
Right.
And it's tricky. I do think that the having the financing plan, this is where it's actually nice to fundraise as a team. Because like if Daryl and I were fundraising, I mean, Daryl would be playing the tune of the financial side, and I'd be playing the tune of the science side. And you got people like to hear that, first of all, they like to see a team come at them. And it's just psychologically it's helpful too, because I can say, no, Daryl, I think these guys, we overtalked here, and he can say, Steve, you just, my goodness, can you just shut up about the science? This guy just wanted to hear how he's going to make money. So you just have this nice partnership when you tag team. But I do think like that's why someone like Daryl's really helpful, because you can lay out a financing plan. You can say, look, this company, to get to where we need to be, we're going to need, in my case, I need $400 million. I do, to really get all the way. I don't lead with that because any angel's like, I'm out of here. But you say, this is what our financing plan looks like over the next 6 years. We're going to do this now, we're going to do this in 2 years, we're going to do this in 4 years. And you build that plan, and people like a plan. They like a great team, and they like a plan. And so if you lay that out, then it's helpful to people. And then just listen for their criticism. I mean, the criticism is you're polishing, your criticism is like just people just saying, look, you got something on your shoe, get that polished. And it just helps you just polish your presentation. Anybody that takes the time to criticize you, that's 1,000 times better than someone not giving you criticism, because it means they took the time to really think about it and say, you know what, interesting mountain climb, but I guarantee you guys do not have what it takes. That you don't have enough avalanche gear, because that third level up there is going to kill you guys. I mean, that's a compliment, because they actually took the time to think about the journey, think about your team, and give you really good criticism about why it's not going to work.
Yeah, definitely. We want to make sure that people are, taking that time to really show a bit of interest. And when we think about company structure, how does company structure, whether it's an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, how does that structure influence investor interest?
It's the plan. So what you're planning, for me, it's a 6-year plan. Why would I do an Arizona LLC when the whole point, everything I need to do is going to be Delaware C Corp based? So why would I inflict additional pain in the ass on me to have to make a change? So lay out the plan, and then your structure should fit that plan. Now, if your plan is to be profitable and making money, an LLC makes a ton of sense. You can say, look, there's tax incentives, there's this and this. You got a service company, then the structure should just match your plan.
I think that's right. Listen, I've seen them all. I've seen all the structures. I've seen the Arizona LLC. I've seen the Delaware C Corp. And to a certain degree, For certain investors, that's important. For others investors, it's really not as important. Um, but I agree with Steve, right? If you have a vision and a plan, structure your organization in a way that's going to help you achieve that plan. I will tell you specifically with respect to Enuncia. So I got to give Enuncia some due here. I think they did a great job of setting up as a Delaware C corp early in the process. Um, I, I personally think that that's the best way to structure. It allows for this 1202, Section 1202 qualified small business, which is a favorable tax treatment for investors. And that can be a real selling point to investors is, hey, if you hold for at least 5 years, um, whatever you monetize, you're not going to pay capital gains up to $10 million. So there are advantages, right, to setting up the C corp. There are other advantages that can be had by going the LLC route. Neolite, which I'm on the board of, is on the LLC path. And so, like I said, I've kind of seen them all, but I agree with Steve. How you structure should align with what it is that your ultimate objectives are. Rick, I'd be curious to hear about CND and how you guys are set up.
Yeah, very early days with three physician founders who were putting in their own money and taking on losses. They had an LLC set up, and for them at that stage, that's what made sense. They had some tax benefits accruing to them. And then when we wrote our plan and we said, this is what the next 5 years is going to look like, these are the type of investors we're going to bring on. We're going to lose money for 3 or 4 years and be, hopefully profitable by 2025, which we are, which is great. I said the only way this is really going to be the easiest way to attract is to go to a Delaware C corp, and we did that, in by the end of 2020, right as we were preparing for the first outside money to come in, and that was the easiest conversation to have with outside investors, and so we did that.
Right. I've never heard an investor argue with a Delaware C corp structure ever.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I like though, Daryl, how you took another step and said, we did this structure because it's gonna be an advantage for you as an investor. So the 5 year holding period, and knowing that and then adding that into your story is, again, you take another step, you put yourself in the investor's shoes. If I had this much money, why would I want to invest in me? And so you're telling even the choice of the how you form the company is back to what's best for the company, what's best for the investor.
And if I'm starting my own company, I'm a scientist, who would be the best people for me to really work with and go to really create this plan?
I mean, I've got some ideas based on my experience. So I spent 13 years in Boston and was part of some initiatives that touched on the Harvard medical system. And, there are obviously kind of anchor institutions in a given geography that are used to working with scientific inventors and incubate them. And so sometimes they're just ecosystems as let's just say a scientific founder that you want to be in locally, because they will introduce you to people sometimes like me who might say, look, I have some time. I'm happy to give you some, sort of free consultation for a bit. And you start getting introduced to people who are used to working with individuals who have really, really good ideas. They may want to stay at their academic center or maybe consider going out. So it's a certain type of person who understands those dynamics and I think can build, very importantly, trust across the table from each other. So these ecosystems, obviously organizations like AZBio, they part of their role is just being connectors to the right people. And I think that's super important geographically. When I moved to Atlanta to run a company, Atlanta is not known for classic life science sort of incubation. They've got healthcare IT and other things, but they said, Rick, you just came from Boston, help us create something where we're trying to build accelerators, and Accenture is a partner, and you start cobbling together things that allow that scientific inventor to say, I feel okay, I have trust here that I'm being introduced to the right people. When I first met the founders of CND, they had been introduced to some people And they called me and said, "What do you think of this?" And it was basically going to sign away 70% of the company before it started. I went, "Do not sign anything yet." So you really have to understand, get inside those ecosystems that are there to help, and I think at some level protect you.
Yeah, like in Arizona, I mean, one advantage, it's amazing the level of talent that retires here. I mean, you get an incredible, and I've seen there's a bunch of retired, global SVPs of Pfizer that are here in somewhere, not too far from Scottsdale. And but it just goes, the list goes on and on. It's a little tricky finding them because honestly, they didn't retire here to then go, help start a bunch of companies. But if you can find some of the, and there is a network of people that would love to give back and they'd love to hear what you're doing, and and they can be super helpful. So I think that's something to plug into, and that's AZBio's done a good job of, I think, bringing people together like that. But look for those people, and this isn't always true, but generally the person who just is willing to help and isn't immediately saying, "Hey, give me this, I can bill you for that." Those are the more that they're just interested in helping, and then they just know, you'll give them some equity at some point. They'll earn some equity for some of their work that they've done. Those are the kinds of people you kind of want. That's a biomarker that you've got a good person, you're a good potential advisor.
Yeah, definitely. And I've seen that aspect of, going to events, networking, speaking with people is very, very important. There's a lot of experienced, subject matter experts out there that really do want to help.
And that kind of goes back to how getting your pitch so you can say something in an elevator in 30 seconds that you don't mind having in the Wall Street Journal the next day. So there's nothing you've said in that elevator that you have to claw back or you wish you'd kind of been confidential about. Having that story that's compelling, it's interesting, and someone can immediately say, "Yeah, I'd like to help you," or "That's just not my area." But that 30-second pitch that is non-confidential, that's compelling, that helps you also with, getting some of these partners. But again, it's like getting someone that's got the financial experience of Daryl on the, excited enough to see the financial opportunity, not just the science. And then you kind of have a real partner here for going forward. So they're out there. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that want to help, but you got to find them.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I would just add too. I mean, yeah, you've got your kind of your outsiders that can help you, but you also have to be focused on building out your team, right, and having the right people that are dedicating full time energy to it. Again, I think one of the things that Elsa and Anuncia has done have been excellent at is just their expertise in regulatory and quality. Right, these are people that know how to get a product FDA approved and on the market. And so you've got to have the right expertise internally to actually turn your plan into reality.
Yeah, and I think too, having you, it just helps a ton if you worked in the industry. It's really tough coming out of academia to want to start something. It just helps that, like, if you look at Rick's, company, pretty awesome opportunity in the lab space, right? So I would think that, a company trying to do something like that, knowing retired executives from Quest and LabCorp that aren't currently going to compete with you, but that would be very able to help. But having that people that are in the industry you want to work in that can help, but knowing the industry is huge, and it's really tough to both build a new product or a service in a new industry and not have already come from that industry.
Yeah, certainly. And then when we think about as we are getting through some of our raises, what would you say is some of the best practices for managing dilution as companies scale and raise and beyond, Series A, Series B, and how can boards really help guide that dilution strategy and capital structure?
Add
Been looking.
value every round.
I mean, at the 30,000 foot level, Rick just gave you the answer.
Yeah. And I'd say the corollary would be, if someone's not adding value, be ruthless about getting them off the boat. I mean, I think actually a lot of the dilution, we don't talk about this, but a lot of the dilution happens because there's one person who's going to drive this thing and they're working 24/7 and they pull in some partners that are part-time, professors or part-time whatever's, and and they take too big an equity stake and they're really not getting it done. And so that the people that are really getting it done, that are the true founders, is it really, if you look at where the founder pie is sliced up, I can't tell you how many times it's way too much pie given to other quote unquote co-founders that are not really running this thing. So I would say wait and to decide how you want to allocate, and be really, really ruthless about who's in the canoe with you and how important are they. Because people will jump in the canoe and they're like, well, I'm just going to do it 2 hours a week. That's not a startup. And someone gave me advice once who said, they looked at 3 or 4 co-founders and said, okay, well, tell me how you're dividing up the equity. And the CEO said, God forbid, there might have been two co-CEOs, but said, well, we're going to do it evenly because that's equitable. And the guy's like, I'm out. I mean, that's not how it works. I tell people to go watch the movie Master and Commander. There is a one master and commander, whether it's and that person runs the boat, and they take investors' money, they go out the ship whaling for 3 or 4 years, and they come back, and the ship either sinks or it comes back with lots of wealth. But there is one master and commander of that ship, and you're insane to lose a lot of the equity to the co-founders that are not carrying the same weight. So I think you got to really understand that, and be experienced enough as a leader to understand that people are deserve different amounts of shares. And everybody, every time I've done a company, there's always someone who's like, oh, I had that idea, and it's like, that's great, good, you didn't do it. So equity is given for who drives value. Back to the point that was just made, who's driving value, and then as the equity given accordingly.
Yeah, if I can just add on to that, I've seen this over and over again over the course of my career. Is a lot of times the early stage company, right? You're cash poor, and you need to get something done, and so you say, well, I've got equity, right? And I can give out equity. It's not candy, and it's not free, right? There's a cost. So you really do have to weigh who you're giving equity and how much equity are you giving to them for the value that they're adding. And the key point is you really want to allocate that equity to those parties that are going to help you drive long-term value, especially in the early stage. Then you start to move into your rounds, seed A, B, and that's where I think Rick's point really chimes in. If you're having to do down rounds, that's just killer, right? And the early stage investors end up getting crammed down, and that is not a fun scenario, right? So as you are going on this journey of raising money, you have to be focused on how is this business creating value, adding value, so that at each successive round you don't find yourself in a down round situation. I've seen it way, way, way too many times where it works the opposite way.
And that goes back to planning, right? Because if you lay out that
Yeah.
plan, you say there's a seed round, and there's a Series A, and there's a Series B, and this is likely the amount of equity that's going to be taken for each of those. What's beautiful is, Radford has these at least in biotech for drug development, they have these surveys that we know exactly what a fair compensation is for a founding CEO, a non-founding CEO, a founding CSO, a non-founding CSO. But it goes back to like the assumptions made when you do a Series A and you raise about 50 to 100 million. What's a fair amount of equity for a founding, say, chief science officer to have versus a non-founding chief science officer? And they're right in there, and you can see them. You can say, okay, it's 3% or it's 6%, and you can model that. And if you can't model it, you need to be working with someone who can model it. But you got to lay out that plan. It's 5-6 years, and you lay out where the equity is going to go to who, and then if you have someone on your team that thinks that's not enough, then it usually screams they don't have enough experience to know that what is normal. And those Bradford surveys are super helpful. I use them every time when I'm building teams.
And I was going to add that the point about that upfront sort of founders, co-founders, equity splits, and so on is super important and hard. I mean, I think you have to be prepared to have uncomfortable conversations. You have to be prepared that maybe someone who's been your colleague and friend takes it the wrong way. And But you've got to do that hard stuff up front because it will live for a while if you don't. The second thing is, can you buffer some of the dilution by getting non-dilutive capital or less dilutive capital? And C&D was very fortunate because we've raised as much non-dilutive capital as we have dilutive capital. So we've raised almost $20 million in grants to fund really important science and R&D that we would have had to raise private capital to do. And we're just closing around now where we'll get our private capital side up to about 25. So almost 50-50. I think it takes a lot of work to apply for specific types of grants. Obviously, we're living in a phase of the government where we're not sure what's going to be available. But I can certainly say in the world of diagnostics, which is an extremely hard road for funding because it's a smaller universe of funders most likely. We've won 3 SBIR phase 2 grants. We've won a grant from the Michael J. Fox Foundation for $4 million. Like, you have to be out there and look for it. It also helps if you have rock star scientific inventors who, when they apply for grants, they've got a high batting average. So it's been, for us, it's been a very big part of how do we actually put some capital that's going to be less dilutive, non-dilutive. It won't apply in every scenario, but I don't know if, I guess, Daryl, probably in your work, you haven't seen as much of that because you're way, upstream. But I don't know if, Steve, what your philosophy is on if there are grants from family offices even. One of our competitors, I mean, raised probably $20-30 million from a, sort of a philanthropic investor, right, out of their family fund.
You're giving me grant envy. I think since grad school, I don't think I've ever gotten a grant, even a nickel. And I guarantee you investors will tell me, well, Steve, just go get some dilutive money. I'm like, well, that's fine, but that's time I'm not spending, selling to who I know who to sell to, which is family offices and biotech VCs. So I've never been successful doing that. And we've written, I've probably written 10, 15, probably 10-ish. So over a number of different companies, but that's just, but I do think, like, again, going back to the Absolute Family Office will give money, but they want to give it, they want to get the tax write-off. So they don't want you walking in and being like, gee, maybe you can get a write-off. They want to know, well, exactly how will I get that write-off? Which goes back to understanding what they want and putting yourself in their shoes. And you say, look, you can either, make come in and make money with us, or you could do a write-off, and here's how it would work. But you have to have your, financially, you've got to have the full story for them. Exactly how would they get a tax write-off by giving you a grant? How does that work? So yeah, I've got grant envy. That's amazing you've done that. I really applaud you. Now I'm just feeling jealous.
Yeah, to that point, Rick, I have a question about your grant, your non-dilutive endeavors. Have you worked with engaged like professional grant writers that help secure these funds? Or I'm curious, right? Because I don't really have experience in the non-dilutive world.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the answer is yes. So out of, let's say, the 3 NIH SBIR grants, which each are, about $3 million, the first one we won without a grant writing company. And it was really part of the extended scientific work that our founders were doing. So they were used to it, and it doesn't hurt that, they're Harvard medical professors. But it takes a lot of work. And so when we then said, look, we're in a position to keep applying, we did engage a grant writing organization that has a higher batting average than, the average. And so you end up paying, some form of upfront retainer that's not terribly burdensome, and then they get a success fee on the size of the grants. And we absolutely didn't have the full bandwidth to keep writing these ourselves. And there are a couple really good firms that have, impressive people on the other side who know how, even what words you need to put in the sections and how long and how short and how much data. They just know all of that. And it was extremely helpful.
That's great. I do need to chime in here. And I see Joanna is on the call, but Annuncia was fortunate to be a recipient of the Flynn grant this time around. $100,000 grant, which Annuncia is going to be using to conduct some clinical work here in Arizona. So, but we're very excited about that. Yeah, no, Rick, that's great insight and feedback on the non-dilutive side.
I think going back to the equity and what's fair and how do you control. I think one of the things that's been insightful for me, when you look at high tech, the software companies, they have an idea. You don't have to spend the kind of money we have to spend in either diagnostics or in therapeutics to actually get to a product that is making money. I mean, we have to spend hundreds of millions to ultimately get there. What that means is that just a huge dilution wipeout for the founding equity. And so if you look at like a typical CEO of a biotech, they they're lucky if they hang on to 2 to 5 to 6% ish if they're the founder by the time they get, somewhere sniffing something that's like a series B ish. Whereas a software company, a founding CEO often will have 30, 40% of the company if they're really good at what they're doing. And so that's reality, and you're not going to really change that reality. So that's why the option pool matters. So each round, for those of you new to this, you'll set up a 10 to 20% option pool for your Series A, your Series B, your Series C, and then you basically compensate individuals out of that option pool. And you go back to a Radford, but what is a fair compensation industry? So say that typical chief medical officers in a Series B is going to have 2% of the company, and they only have 0.5% in their founding equity by now, you can allocate another 1.5% in the option pool to them. But again, that's planning. You have a lever of 10 to 15% option pool for an A and a B, and you look at that and you sit with the investor and you say, look, I have this money set aside. This is not free money either. To Daryl's point, this is expensive money, but this is option pool, and there's 15%. I'm going to allocate this much more to the CEO because he's a little light. I'm going to bring in an expert CFO, and that person's going to need 1%, 0.5%. So that's going to go there. I need to do the following 4 scientists. But again, it's planning. You've got to have that financial plan laid out, and part of that is the option pool. But you should expect that there's a lot of people in this industry that make a lot more money on the option pool that's given later than they do on the founder's equity.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to go into investor incentives real quick. I hear a lot of debate, people kind of contemplating really the types of investor incentives that they plan to use. And I was just wondering, what are the potential risks and benefits of offering investor incentives like warrants, note discounts, or pro rata rights during early fundraising rounds?
It kills you every time. I mean, you've got to be a strong enough founder and leader that you're like, no, you're getting what you pay for, and I'm not going to give you some new tool that I have to go Google to figure out what it even means. And I got to explain that to everybody else, because everybody else is like, what the heck? Why didn't I get that little, warrant ratchet, whatever? And so the more you can say, no, that's not what we're doing. We're offering a fair price. And if you don't like it, there's plenty of other investors that do. But that's having a position of strength, right? And when you're in a position of weakness, then they start getting you, and then you get all kinds of things like that happen. And all of them cost the founders money, always.
Yeah, again, I just have to double click on it. Equity is not free. In fact, equity is the most expensive form of financing that there is, right? But to Steve's point, right? If you find yourself not in a position of strength, and an investor says, "Hey, I really would like a warrant, or I'd like a discount on this note," or it's very tempting to agree, right, to that. And those are levers, right, that can be pulled when necessary. But you have to understand, if you're going to pull the lever, there's a cost. There's always a cost.
Yeah, I think the easiest lever that we've used is some pro rata rights that are fairly straightforward. And we were in a position knowing that we'd have lots of demand for the rounds. And if this was something we had to make sort of a, negotiating trade with some of the investors, and they said, well, we'd like to make sure some of the folks who have already been investing have a chance to continue to invest. Yeah. And future investors normally like to hear that the ones that are already there are saying, hey, I want to keep going, right? Because they're in the company, they've seen it, they know the most. And so if they're saying, I want to keep investing, So we've used that as something that may get us to yes on other things, but to the other points, you have to be very careful with all the other stuff. Obviously, somebody else who comes in later who has a lot of power and is a professional investor might say, hey, I'm looking at all this stuff. I'm going to tell you right now, this all has to go away, or else we're just not going to waste our time. And so there's a lot of just part of the cost is the time you have to go through all this stuff and the legal fees and the back and forth, right? So you just want that to be as clean. And it's hard because you have to, I think Steve said, you have to be strong enough to push back, but you also just, it's almost if you to convince sometimes those investors that it's also in their it doesn't, it may not seem it's in their best interest, but it's in their best interest for the company and their future position to be clean. So if it's not and it's got all this stuff, then it just, it ends up not benefiting many people. So,
and that's where if you model it, your financial model of equity, you'll find that all these little widgets of cram downs and liquidation preferences. Good luck modeling those. Like you got to have you got to have 8 PhDs in finance to do it. So you realize how complicated they are, and so when you start to model it, you'll get angry. You'll like, what the heck? I can't even model. I can barely understand that, and I definitely can't model it. But this looks really bad for everybody that isn't getting this. And so again, back to building a plan. You lay that out, and then you'll immediately start to not want to add anything to that that's going to make it really hard to model. And all those things are really hard to model when you start to really dig into what the levers are.
Yeah, if I can just double click on that a little bit, in terms of modeling, planning, your equity plan, I strongly recommend that if you're going to go out and raise money, you need a cap management software solution. My personal preference is Carta. I don't
Me
know
too.
if, Rick, I don't know if you guys are using any kind of cap table management software.
yeah, we're using Carta. I just got the invoice because we have, it escalates obviously as you
Yeah,
go, but it's been worth it.
Agreed.
it is worth it. So yeah, if you're going to raise money, I mean, again, I've done it on spreadsheets. It's really, really hard. Carta is a fantastic tool. I recommend that all my clients use Carta because it really does help you not only administer right your current cap table, but really helps the whole comprehensive planning and management of your cap table.
If you're just starting out, a good Excel file that just has
Yeah,
the model, and then working with somebody that has these, and any good financial person who's been in this space has those, and they just can generate those. But then absolutely moving to Carta when you start to get to a very many investors involved. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen a lot of executives that do prefer Carta.
They do. And the more seasoned ones, the more they're like, I don't want to. What, you're not using Carta? Oh my gosh, I'm using some other software. Or they want to manage all 8 of their investments in the same software. So
Right.
Yeah, thank you. And just as we are approaching 9, I just would like to just give you a chance to offer any closing thoughts that you might have for all of our attendees.
I have 2 movie suggestions. You go watch when you're thinking about equity allocation. Go watch Master and Commander this weekend, Russell Crowe movie. Watch the whole thing, and then ask yourself, okay, who are the leaders of that ship? And what do you think is a fair equity of proportion to the different guys? There's a doctor, who's kind of the CSO, and there's a bunch of other people's under him. And you definitely won't be dividing things equally. You'll really realize how much stress Russell Crowe has as the leader. So watch Master and Commander when you think about, helming these kinds of companies. Then the other thing to watch, and this goes back to claim dumping, which I would use in Arizona. We're in the desert, we're in the gold, silver mines. This concept of claim jumping basically builds pretty much almost every Western movie has a concept of a claim jump. What is a claim jump? It's someone who doesn't want to go find the first gold mine, and come up with the idea. They figured out that hanging out at the tavern and just hearing about the people that have come in that already have a gold mine, it's a heck of a lot easier to go jump in with them legally or illegally. Maybe they shoot them, so this claim jumping concept is really, it's all throughout all the Westerns. But go watch the movie. It's Daniel Day. There Will Be Blood, and it's about the oil industry, and it's based about claim jumping. And that, if you understand human nature, and it's just much easier to jump on an oil rig, an oil or a gold mine or a silver mine when it's already established than it is to go do it from scratch, you'll really understand this business a lot better. So go watch Master and Commander for being a CEO of biotech, and watch There Will Be Blood for really understanding how claim jumping works and how to avoid it. And a lot of these little financial levers are basically claim jumping.
Steve, I'm going to watch those after March Madness because I got to watch basketball for the next 3 weeks. But yeah, great recommendations. Yeah, no, I get this is a great topic, right? And it's important for everybody to really be aware, right, of what your options are, how you should go about the process. And again, just kind of my parting comment is you have to understand this is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. Get a thick skin, right? Be prepared to get a lot of rejection, and that's okay. And also to the point Steve made earlier, right? When you're getting constructive feedback and criticism, that's a good thing. As much of that as you get that you can incorporate as you go through the journey, it's very very valuable for you. So just be persistent and work on it.
Yeah, I guess I would end with just understanding that investors are often and should be programmed to say no for 50 reasons, right? They've got a lot that come at them, and they just, they've got to be good at what they do. And so most of the attempts are no's. And so they're programmed to say no. And then you, as a good entrepreneur inventor, are programmed to say yes and have enthusiasm. I think finding the balance between being a good evangelist, but also being someone who can build trust and rapport with the folks who normally want to say no is a real interesting balance. And I think that what I have done, even with my founders, who are very credible in the world of neurology, is when we're having conversations, almost point out the risks to the other side. These are the 5 things we worry about, and here's how we're
Yeah.
trying to address it. Because that will build, I think, credibility and trust. Because we often see in the movies, you got to evangelize, you got to evangelize. Yes, you've got to have the conviction because you're trying to do something innovative that maybe others aren't ready to do or willing to do. But you've got to also be smart enough to say, if I were in your shoes, and this is how we think about these risks, I think that can really help.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to everyone on our panel. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Steve. This was a fantastic discussion. Definitely a lot of insights to gain. And thank you for everyone for joining our AZ BioPeers today in March. Be on the lookout for our In the Loop newsletter and our April edition of AZ BioPeers. And be sure to reach out to us at AZBio. Again, like some of our panelists mentioned, we really do hope to be the connectors within this ecosystem. And thank you, everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
Dylan.